The unpunished human space station Veltraxis Prime floated like a silent giant, above the gas giant Lorovex 7 glowing with swirling green storms and rings of icy dust. It was the heart of the Galactic Council, a place where ambassadors, delegates, and diplomats from over 1,000 species came together to negotiate peace, sign treaties, and argue about politics in one of the most advanced and tightly regulated areas. In the known galaxy, laws here were stricter than on any homeworld. The punishment for breaking even a minor rule could mean exile or execution, but today something happened that no one could explain, something that broke the natural order of the station and shook the pride of the alien Empress. A tall human wearing the black and silver uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps walked through the open marketplace. At the center of the station, he moved calmly, nodding at shopkeepers and security bots. His name was James Carter, a senior human envoy known for his sharp tongue and smooth voice, but what happened next would leave everyone speechless. A Zelvarian noble crossed Carter's path, a tall crystalline being, with layers of glowing plates on his body, and a prideful air around him. Nobles of the Zelvarian Empire were not to be touched, not to be addressed without permission. They were second only to their emperors in status, but in a rush of noise and motion, the nobles stepped into Carter's path. Just as a maintenance drone buzzed overhead, startled Carter turned quickly, his elbow catching the noble square in the center mass. A cracking sound echoed through the chamber. The noble fell screaming. In his musical chime-like voice, his armor fractured, a blue glowing fluid leaking out. In seconds, the area filled with stunned silence. Dozens of aliens watched, frozen, waiting for security to strike Carter down. The punishment for assaulting a noble on Veltraxis Prime was execution. No trial, no delay, no exceptions. The Zelvarians themselves began to hiss and hum in fury. 3 of them surrounded Carter, one even drawing a pulse weapon ready to fire, but that didn't happen. Instead, 3 galactic marshals in black exosuits stepped in, forming a triangle around the human. They didn't arrest him, they didn't even disarm him. One of them simply nodded and spoke into a translator device, stating that the incident had been logged and Earth's diplomatic corps would handle internal consequences. Then they guided Carter away, past the furious crowd, past the bleeding noble, past the enraged Zelvarian guards. As if nothing had happened, the crowd broke into 100 questions at once, aliens yelling in every language, asking why the human wasn't punished, why he wasn't shackled or shot right there. Rumors began to spread in seconds. Some said Carter had brainwashed the marshals. Others believed humans had bribed the council. Still others whispered that this was just more proof that humans were untouchable. In a nearby cafe overlooking the marketplace, Karzal, a Zentari diplomat with 4 bright eyes and deep orange skin, sat watching the scene unfold with a growing feeling of bitterness. He had seen this before, not once, not twice, but too many times to count. Humans causing trouble and walking away without punishment, as if protected by some invisible shield. Remembered when a human trader destroyed a Zentari ship in disputed space 5 cycles ago, claiming self-defense. No punishment, no repayment, not even a formal apology. Earth had simply stated their side of the story, and the council dropped the case. Now here was another human hurting one of the most protected individuals in the galaxy and being gently escorted away, as if he had slipped on a wet floor. Karzal clenched his jaws silently. He knew the council feared Earth. Everyone knew it, but no one said it out loud. He stood slowly, his long coat sweeping the floor as he moved. He had stayed silent long enough. It was time to find out the truth, not just for himself, but for the entire galaxy. Down in the lower levels of the station, Carter sat in a small chamber alone, sipping a drink as if nothing had happened. A soft chime rang, and a projection appeared on the wall displaying a message from Earth's High Command, saying everything was being taken care of and he was to remain calm until the council officially moved on the matter. Carter smiled faintly, not because he enjoyed the chaos, but because he had seen this play out so many times before. The truth was never something the other species were ready to hear. It wasn't about power or corruption. It wasn't about influence or technology. It was about something far older, far deeper, something buried under centuries of war and fear, something that still echoed in the minds of those who remembered what humans once did when they were truly pushed. As Karzal began his quiet investigation into the mystery, Carter leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and distant. He knew the questions were coming. He knew the old stories would be pulled from the ashes, and when they were, the galaxy would have no choice but to remember why humans always got diplomatic immunity, because the alternative was worse. Envy and suspicion. Karzal moved through the polished halls of Veltraxis Prime, his thoughts spinning faster than the transport lifts that carried diplomats from chamber to chamber. His long fingers tapped against his side as his 4 eyes remained fixed ahead, but his mind was elsewhere. Stuck on the scene he had witnessed just a few hours earlier. The human named Carter had harmed his Elverian noble, and yet instead of being restrained or punished, he had been protected calmly and efficiently by the very security forces that were supposed to be neutral. It was not the first time this had happened, and Karzel knew it would not be the last unless someone asked the hard questions, unless someone finally demanded the truth. Reached his quarters, a sleek silver dome overlooking one of the station's glowing spires, and activated the internal system's data screens. Blinked to life, forming a rotating wall of names, events, classified files, and half-deleted logs, all tied to one word: humans. He began to pull up old incident reports, each one more baffling than the last. A human diplomat who accidentally caused a starship to crash into a trade outpost. No consequences. A human pilot who ignored landing protocols and damaged a sacred Lothari shrine. No punishment. A human commander who fired warning shots into a council meeting, claiming it was a reflex. Again, number response from the council. Accept a formal request for understanding. Karzel kept reading, his pulse growing faster, his jaws tightening as the pattern became too clear to ignore. It was not that humans were perfect. It was not that they never made mistakes. In fact, they made many, but the problem was that every time something happened, the punishment never came. The rules were always bent or skipped or rewritten to let them go free, and the other species noticed. Oh yes, they noticed, but none had the courage to speak too loudly. Some whispered, some cursed behind closed doors, but in the end they all looked the other way and let it pass. But not Karzel remembered something that had happened during his youth, an incident no one liked to talk about. A human explorer had landed on a Centauri moon without permission, claiming it was an accident. When he was approached by local peacekeepers, something went wrong. Recordings were unclear, but the result had been a crater where the outpost once stood, and the explorer had been taken off-world within the hour. No questions, no investigation. The council called it a misunderstanding, but Karzel had never believed. Faith left his quarters again, this time heading for the lower archives, a place where very few dared to go without permission. He used an old access code, one given to him by his mentor long ago when he had first joined the diplomatic corps. The doors opened slowly, revealing rows of glowing data stones. Flickering in silence, Karzel moved with purpose, locating a specific section marked early contact records. The files that described the first decades after humanity entered the Galactic. Stagger felt colder here, as if the truth itself was trying to push him back. As he reached for one of the older records, he hesitated only for a moment, then activated it and watched as the holographic projection filled the room. It showed the first human ship arriving in council space, massive, crude by today's standards, but filled with energy and strange life forms. The humans had approached not as beggars or conquerors, but as something in between, curious, eager, but also dangerous. The video shifted, showing early diplomatic meetings between human envoys and council species. Karzel watched their faces, their posture. They were polite, yes, respectful even, but behind their smiles was something no other species carried. It was not arrogance, it was not pride, it was something colder, deeper, a kind of patience that hinted at restraint. More records followed, showing small incidents, border clashes, resource disputes, moments when other species would have been crushed or punished, but humans were simply warned or negotiated with, even when they were clearly in the wrong. One particular file caught Karzel's attention. It described a conflict between Earth and the Virelian swarm, a race long believed to be invincible. The Virelians had tried to blockade Earth's trade lanes, thinking humans would submit. Instead, the blockade ended with every Virelian ship destroyed. In under 3 standard days, the council had buried the report, but Karzel could see it now, the numbers, the scale of destruction, and then the statement filed by the council. Afterwards, diplomatic immunity status granted to all human representatives. For future encounters, no explanation, no vote, just a sudden decision. Karzel leaned back, his body tense, his eyes wide. He had suspected favoritism, he had suspected corruption. But this was something else entirely. It was fear, raw and ancient, not of humans themselves perhaps, but of something they had done, something they could still do, and that fear had spread into the highest levels of power, where laws were written, where justice was supposed to be blind, but clearly was not. When it came to Humanch returned to his quarters with the data core in his hand. His next step was clear. He had to find someone who had lived through those first wars, someone who had seen what humans could do when truly provoked, someone who could confirm the dark truth hiding behind their smiles and their diplomacy. Because if the galaxy was giving humans a free pass, it was not because they were special. It was because the alternative was worse than anyone dared admit, and Karzel needed to know what that alternative was before it rose against regrets buried in Warth. transport shuttle moved slowly through the outer rings of Veltraxis Prime, its engines humming a low steady rhythm as Karzel sat inside his thoughts. Racing faster than the ship could fly, in his hand he held the data core taken from the archives, filled with pieces of history most of the galaxy had forgotten or deliberately buried. But Karzel needed more than files, he needed a voice, a witness, someone who had seen what the records refused to say, someone who had survived the shadow of humanity during the time before they were given immunity, before the Council started protecting them like fragile glass while fearing them like monsters. Arrived at the lower colony of Trelvik 9, a forgotten mining moon on the edge of Council space, where old soldiers and failed diplomats spent their final years in silence and solitude. The station was covered in dust and age, its metal walls groaning under the pressure of time. Karzel stepped out of the shuttle, his long coat trailing behind him as he made his way through narrow halls and flickering lights. The air smelled of rust and recycled air, and the only sound was the soft crackle of old machinery. He reached a door marked with an old symbol not used in centuries, the emblem of the original Peacekeepers, the first force ever created by the Galactic Council, before the current marshals existed, before rules were clean and cold back when order was kept by fire and force. He pressed the chime and waited. The door opened slowly, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with relics, weapons, maps, and the smell of strong herbs. Inside sat an old Graxan warrior, his green-scaled skin faded with age, one eye replaced by a glowing lens and one arm missing, replaced by a worn metal limb. He looked up slowly, his voice deep and tired as he spoke. "You should not have come here." Diplomat Harzel bowed slightly and spoke with respect. "You need to understand the truth about humans and the war that gave them immunity. I need to know what happened before the Council erased the files. I need to know why we all fear them." The old Graxan stared at him for a long moment, then gestured for him to sit. "You want to dig into graves that were sealed for a reason," essayed. "Fine, but you will not like what you find." Poured a thick drink into 2 metal cups, one for each of them, and then leaned back as the story began. He spoke of a time before humans joined the Council, back when Earth was still new to spaceflight and other species saw them as primitive but curious. Their technology was fast, their minds even faster, but they lacked the discipline and structure that other empires had, and so the Council kept them at a distance, offering them peace but never trust, until one day a mistake was made. A group of Council-aligned species launched a preemptive strike on a human colony, thinking they would fold easily. It was meant to be a lesson, a warning to slow their rise before it became a threat, but the response was not surrender. The response was annihilation. The old Graxan paused, then pointed to a blackened photo frame on the wall, showing a planet cracked open like a broken egg. That was the first time we saw what humans really were, not because they wanted to destroy, but because they refused to lose. They changed the rules of war. They created weapons we had never seen, tactics that made no sense until it was too late. They turned fear into fuel and pain into strategy. Yarza listened without speaking, his breath caught in his chest. Graxan continued, his voice now filled with the weight of memory. "We sent fleets. They sent ghosts. We sent fire. They sent silence. Our ships would vanish. Whole armadas gone without a signal. And when we tried to strike their heart, we found only ashes and bait. They made us think they were weak until they wanted us to know they were noted. Then came the moment the war was supposed to end. The Council gathered its strongest forces and cornered the last human fleet above a dead star, ready to force surrender. Instead, they received a message for words burned into every comm system, every ship, every brain with a neural link: do not bond. Then the star went dark. No explosion, no battle, just darkness. And when the light returned, the Council's fleet was gone, not destroyed, just missing. No trace, no signal, only silence and fear. And then the humans stopped. They sent envoys. They offered peace. They walked into the Council unarmed and smiled, and the Council agreed, not out of diplomacy, but out of terror. Karzel sat frozen, the drink untouched in his hand, the silence in the room pressing against his thoughts like a heavy fog. "So we gave them immunity," the Graxan said quietly, "not to protect them, but to protect ourselves." Stood slowly, his old limbs cracking back. "Out if they are ever pushed again. If someone forgets the price of their patience, they will not send diplomats next to me." Karzel stood and bowed deeply, his mind now filled with more fear than clarity. As he left the chamber, the old warrior gave him one final warning: do not ask the humans about it. They do not speak of the past, and we should be grateful for that. As the shuttle carried him back to Veltraxis Prime, Karzel stared at the stars, now understanding that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows, and the mystery behind human immunity was no longer a puzzle. It was a warning, a silent threat written in the history of fear and sealed in blood. The truth in the shadows returned to Veltraxis Prime. Prime was quiet, but Karzal's mind was not. He sat in his private chamber, lights dimmed, screens turned off, silence stretching like a wall around him. His four eyes stared at the data core he had retrieved, and the words of the old Graxon kept circling inside his thoughts. We do not bow. Those four words had once erased an entire fleet and shaken the council to its core, yet none of this was public. None of it ever made it to official records. Only a few elders across different species even remembered, and those who did kept their mouths shut, not out of respect, but out of survival. Karzal knew the truth now, or at least part of it. He had seen the fear in the Graxon's face. Not just old trauma, but living dread, fear that one wrong word could bring the darkness back. And yet Karzal also knew he could not stop digging, because fear that lived in silence always grew stronger, and someone needed to look directly at it before the galaxy forgot and made the same mistake again. Accessed his private channel, one used only for extreme emergencies, and sent a secure message to a contact buried deep inside the council's classified archives. Someone who owed him favors and had access to the sealed black box files. The response came quickly, just one sentence. It read, access granted, one use only, no copies, no backups. Read and forgetments. Later a file opened on his screen without title or author, just a string of numbers and a playback icon. He pressed it and the air in the chamber turned cold. As the recording played, it showed footage from a council vessel orbiting a dead planet long ago. The voice of a young commander filled the speakers. Reporting that the planet had been wiped out in under 6 hours, not by orbital bombardment, not by weapons known to any species, but by something worse. There were no craters, no firestorms, no radiation, just silence and stillness. Entire cities vanished, buildings intact, but empty. Not a single living thing remained, even insects gone, animals gone, people gone, as if scooped from existence. The only survivors were those who had been off-world during the attack, and even they refused to speak of what they had seen. Then the screen changed, showing a recording from the bridge of a council dreadnought. Officers screaming, sensors failing, power flickering, something moving through the blackness of space faster than any known craft. No engine trail, no signal, just a shape like a streak of shadow. It passed through 3 ships, and each one shut down, silently floating lifeless into the void. No damage, no explosion, just death. And then came the message that froze Karzal's breath in his throat, a simple voice on every channel, speaking calm, slow, and terrifying in its certainty. It said, stand down, we do not want war, but we will end you if for said feed ended. And the screen went black. Karzal sat frozen, unable to move for several minutes, his thoughts racing too fast to catch. He had believed the story's exaggerated tales of war twisted by time, but now he had seen it with his own eyes. The humans had not asked for immunity, they had demanded peace with their actions, and shown what happened when peace was denied. And yet something still felt incomplete. He needed to confront the source, the one who had caused the most recent chaos, the human diplomat Carter, the man who had injured the Zelvarian noble and walked away untouched. If anyone still carried the truth, it was him. Karzal arranged a meeting through unofficial channels, using old diplomatic codes that forced a response within minutes. He was told to come alone to a small observation deck overlooking the outer ring of Veltraxis Prime, where ships drifted in slow, quiet orbits like stars on strings. Arrived and found Carter already there, standing with his hands behind his back, watching a planet's rings spin in silence. He turned slowly, his face calm and his eyes unreadable. You've been digging, Carter said without turning, his voice quiet but not surprised. Karzal nodded, not speaking, yet not trusting himself. Carter gestured to a seat beside him, and after a moment Karzal sat. We do they fear you? Karzal finally asked. What did your people do to make the council bend its laws? Carter looked at him for a long moment, then spoke, not in anger, not in arrogance, but in something heavier. Gave them a gift, say the gift of choice, surrender or survival, and they chose survival. We did not come to conquer, we only defended ourselves. But when pushed, we learned how to win, not by being stronger, but by never stopping. We don't fight fair, we don't play by rules that cost us our lives. And when we are cornered, we break the walls that hold us. In a pause, then looked directly at Karzal, with a gaze so steady it felt like stone. Diplomatic immunity is not protection, it is containment. We are not dangerous because we want to be. We are dangerous because we refuse to be broken again. Karzal felt the weight of the words settle deep inside him, the pieces falling into place. All the whispers, all the silence, all the bending of laws and gentle treatment. It was not favoritism. It was fear, not of what humans were, but what they might become. Again, if forgotten, if provoked, if forced to remember the wars they buried. And in that moment, as he looked out at the stars, Karzal understood that the greatest weapon was not a fleet or a bomb, but memory and restraint. And when those failed, only One thing remained: human warning Voltraxis Prime was quieter than usual. The usual bustle of diplomats and traders was replaced by whispers and uneasy glances, as word of Karzel's investigation began to spread through hidden channels. The Galactic Council itself was in turmoil, but no official statement was made. Instead, the members gathered behind closed doors, their faces drawn and serious. No one wanted to speak openly about the humans or the immunity that shielded them, but the fear beneath the surface was real and growing fast. Meanwhile, James Carter remained on the station, but he was no longer seen in public areas. His meetings were secret, and his movements carefully guarded by council marshals, not because they trusted him but because they feared what might happen if harm came to the human diplomat. And it was not long before their fears were tested, when a sudden explosion rocked a lower docking bay. The attack was precise and deadly. A bomb placed in a cargo crate detonated, sending shards of metal and fire spiraling into the air. The target was clear: Carter, but Carter was not there when the bomb went off. He had been warned just moments before by a shadowy figure who vanished as quickly as they appeared. The attack failed, but it sent a message to everyone: the humans were not untouchable. They were targets and threats to some who refused to accept their immunity as a shield for what they called arrogance and recklessness. In the dark corridors beneath the station, Karzel met with an informant, a weary Zentari named Rel, who dealt in information that cost more than gold. Rel handed Karzel a data chip, saying the humans were about to send a message to the council, one that would change everything. A Gainth chip contained a transmission from Earth itself, a message broadcast to every council member. In encrypted form, it was short but chilling. It said simply, "Do not make us remind you again." No one knew what the reminder meant, but rumors quickly spread across the station that it was a threat, a warning that if the immunity was questioned or the humans were provoked, they would not hold back as they had before, but instead unleash a power the galaxy had not seen in centuries. Karzel watched the transmission again and again, the cold voice of Earth's representative echoing in his mind, the calm certainty behind the words that hid the real meaning behind the diplomatic veil. It was a promise and a threat rolled into one, and the tension on Voltraxis Prime was now palpable. Carter disappeared. No one knew where he went. Some said he left the station secretly. Others whispered that he was taken away by Earth's agents for his own protection or punishment. But the truth was that Carter was preparing something unseen, a plan that would test the fragile peace and force every species to remember why the humans had been given immunity in the first place. The council met in emergency session, their chambers filled with anxious faces. The head of the Galactic Marshal spoke quietly about increased security measures and the need to respect human diplomatic status, but others argued that the humans were playing a dangerous game and that the immunity should be reconsidered. But the oldest voices among them called for caution, reminding everyone of the wars buried in shadow, the destruction that came when humans were cornered, and the terrible price paid for immunity to be granted. As the meeting adjourned, Karzel stepped into the hallway, his mind racing. The silence was broken by a sudden alarm flashing red and warning lights sweeping across the station. Ships from Earth began to arrive unexpectedly, fleets that no one had seen coming, ships bristling with weapons, technology far beyond anything the council possessed or dared to admit. The station's defenses scrambled to respond, but the humans moved with precision and calm. Their arrival was not an invasion, it was a show of force, a warning. Karzel stood in the observation deck watching the ships as they took position around Voltraxis Prime. The message was clear: the humans were reminding the galaxy that immunity was not a gift to be questioned, but a shield to be respected, or else. The atmosphere on the station shifted from unease to fear as ambassadors whispered in every language, and council leaders realized that the fragile peace was now balanced on a razor's edge. And somewhere deep in the shadows, Carter prepared for the moment when the silence would break and the galaxy would have to choose whether to respect the warning or face the consequences of forgetting once again what the humans were capable of. The day humanity was unleashed, the galaxy watched silently as Earth's fleet took its place around Voltraxis Prime, a silent wall of steel and light that made even the most powerful empires pause. The ships were unlike any other seen before, sleek, fast, and armed with weapons that bent the rules of physics and war. The council's leaders met behind closed doors, their faces pale, their voices low, as they debated the meaning of this unexpected arrival. It was not a declaration of war, but it was the closest thing many had ever seen to a warning shouted across the stars. Karzel stood among them, feeling the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. The stories he had uncovered, the warnings he had heard, all led to this fragile moment where the truth was no longer a secret and the galaxy had to decide How to face a species that had been held back by fear and respect for so long. Silence broke. When a message came through the Council's highest channels, it was from Earth's leader. A calm voice speaking not with threats, but with certainty, saying that humans sought peace, but peace built on respect, and understanding that the immunity granted to their diplomats was not a weakness, but a symbol of control of power kept in balance, and that should anyone forget the cost of breaking that balance, the consequences would be felt across the galaxy. Then the unexpected happened. A group of rogue mercenaries known as the Black Talons launched an attack on one of the Council's outer stations, hoping to exploit the tension and provoke a war, but they underestimated the humans waiting in the shadows. The attack was swift and brutal, but when the Black Talons met Earth's forces, they were met with something beyond technology, beyond tactics, something raw and primal. A human battalion, led by commanders who had learned to fight in ways no other species understood. They used the environment as a weapon, their movements unpredictable, their strikes precise and deadly, and within hours the mercenaries were routed, leaving behind wreckage and whispers of a power that no one wanted to face again. Karzal watched the reports come in, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. He had heard the stories of humans fighting wars not for glory, but for survival, and now he was seeing them in action. A species that refused to bend, that refused to break, and whose immunity was not a shield, but a promise of devastation if Crossed. The Council convened again. The debate more heated than ever. Some called for revoking immunity, arguing that no species should be above the law. Others warned that to do so would risk unleashing a force the galaxy was not prepared to contain, and that the immunity was a fragile piece, held together by fear and understanding. In the quiet corners of Veltraxis Prime, whispers spread of experiments done on captured humans centuries ago, trials meant to find weaknesses, but always failing because humans adapted faster than any technology could control, and their minds held secrets no one understood, a strength born from pain and survival. Karzal found himself drawn to the archives again, searching for anything that could explain the roots of this power, something beyond weapons or ships, something that made humans so feared, not just respected. Discovered files marked as top secret containing research about human DNA, showing unusual adaptability, rapid healing, and a unique neural response to stress and danger, traits that made them nearly unstoppable in combat and immune to many forms of alien biological and psychological warfare. The pieces fit together, forming a picture of a species shaped by hardship and struggle, that had turned its survival into an art form, that had learned to fight with body, mind, and spirit united in a way no other species could match. As the galaxy held its breath, Karzal realized that the immunity was not a favor, but a necessary boundary, a line drawn in blood and memory to prevent the horrors of the past from returning, and that humanity was both a warning and a hope, a species that could destroy or protect, depending on the choice made by those who shared the star sands. So the day humanity was unleashed was not a single moment, but a slow-burning truth revealed in whispers, actions, and silence, a truth that the galaxy could no longer ignore. The reason behind the First Galactic Council chamber was filled with tension, like a storm waiting to break. The leaders of many worlds sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the central platform, where James Carter stood alone, calm and composed, as if he carried the weight of centuries in his gaze. The room was heavy with unspoken questions, whispers of fear, respect, and anger swirling like unseen currents. Carter began to speak, his voice steady and low, filling the vast space with words that carried more than meaning, they carried history and warning. "Will come seeking peace," Carter said, "but peace built on respect, not fear or weakness. Our immunity is not a privilege, it is a price paid in blood and silence. The galaxy has forgotten the wars buried in shadow, the destruction we left behind when pushed to the edge. Do not mistake our calm for weakness or our smiles for surrender. We hold power not because we desire it, but because we have no choice. When survival demands it, we become a storm that cannot be stopped." A paused, letting the words sink deep into the hearts and minds of every listener. The memory of dead worlds and vanished fleets hung heavy in the air like a silent ghost, a reminder of what had been and what could be again if the fragile peace broke. Carter continued, "We do not seek to rule or conquer, but to exist, to protect what we have built, and to ensure no one ever forgets the cost of war with humanity. The immunity you grant is not a shield for impunity, but a boundary drawn in understanding, a line that says respect life or face the storm. We do not wish to bring destruction, but if forced we will bring it without hesitation." The chamber remained silent for long moments until a voice broke through the stillness. A representative from the Virelian swarm, one of the fiercest and oldest empires in the galaxy, spoke with a voice that trembled between fear and respect. "To have witnessed the fury of your kind before and lived to tell the tale. Your immunity is well earned, but fragile. It must never be abused, for if it is, the peace we all seek will shatter, and darkness will return. Others nodded, some in agreement, some in silent dread, knowing that the fragile balance depended not on law but on memory and restraint. Carter nodded in return, acknowledging the truth in the words, then turning to Karzel, who stood watching quietly. From the city you have sought the truth, and now you hold it in your hands, Karzel. It is a heavy burden to bear, but necessary for the galaxy to understand the reason behind the fear. The reason why humans always get diplomatic immunity is because we have shown what happens when that immunity is lost. Chamber emptied slowly as whispers turned to conversations, and conversations to plans for the future. A future where fear was not ignorance, but knowledge, where respect was not weakness but wisdom, and where humanity's place was accepted not because of privilege but because of truth. Outside the chamber, Karzel stepped into the bright light of the station's central plaza. The stars shining above him seemed colder now, yet somehow clearer. His heart weighed with the truth but lighter with understanding. He knew the galaxy would never be the same, and that humans would always walk a path shadowed by their past and guarded by their silencing. Somewhere deep in the galaxy, far from Veltraxis Prime, a new fleet of human ships prepared to leave their homeworld, not for war but for peace, their sails catching the light of distant suns, carrying with them a message clear and simple, that humanity was not a threat to be feared, but a force to be respected, a force that had earned its place among the stars through fire, sacrifice, and it promised never to forget the cost of their immunity. The great hall of the Galactic Council lay silent, but charged with attention. No one could ignore. Centuries of history weighed heavily on every word spoken that day. James Carter stood steady, his presence commanding, though calm, his voice carrying across the chamber, filled with leaders of countless worlds, their faces reflecting awe, fear, and reluctant respect. The truth he shared was no longer a secret, no longer a whisper behind closed doors. It was the story of humanity's survival, a story written in blood, sacrifice, and an unyielding will to live and protect. Carter spoke not to boast, but to remind the galaxy that peace was fragile, that immunity was not a gift, but a bond forged by memories of war and loss, that to challenge it was to awaken a force unlike any other to misunderstand. It was to risk everything. The room absorbed his words, the weight of history settling like dust after a storm. A silent agreement passing between all present that humanity's place was earned not by conquest, but by endurance, and an iron promise never to forget the price paid. Outside the chamber, Karzel breathed deeply. The stars above seemed brighter, somehow clearer, as if the universe itself acknowledged the truth revealed that day. He felt a mixture of fear and hope, knowing the galaxy had been changed forever, that the silence that protected humans was no longer just a mystery but a warning and a lesson learned. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was theirs to walk together, not as enemies, but as wary allies bound by respect and the shared knowledge of what lay beneath the calm surface of peace far beyond Veltraxis Prime. Earth's fleets prepared to sail again, not for battle, but for a new chapter. A new promise whispered across the stars, that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, but also a force for peace, a species shaped by fire, yet tempered by wisdom, carrying with them the legacy of survival and the determination to never allow their past to be forgotten or repeat. And so the galaxy turned a page written not in violence, but in understanding, a story that would be told for generations, a story of why humans always got diplomatic immunity, a story of power, sacrifice, and peace, sealed with the knowledge that some truths are too dangerous to ignore, but too important to hide at the end.